Hello everyone, just going to walk you through some of my ideas and thinking behind my retopologizing of my little bear. And of course we're starting off with the quad draw tool. You're going to find that I'm going to use the quad draw tool almost exclusively for this entire retopologizing of my model. And the first thing that I like to do is go in and start establishing all the boundary loops for the entirety of my model, and specifically all of the major features. So the eyes, the nose, the ears, the tail. I even like to establish the boundary loops for the arms. I find it really helpful to start laying that foundation pretty early on. In addition, I also like to define the major features of the model with some boundary loops as well. So here I'm just going in trying to figure out where the jawline is. I'm not really counting, I'm not really trying to figure out how all this is going to connect together yet. I'm just trying to establish the basic framework for the entire model. This center line that I'm building right now is a really great example of a major feature that I want to kind of get in there pretty quickly so that I can understand its role and its larger impact on the placement of the topology inside the scene itself. And as I go through here, it gets a little tight down there at the nose, but I try to space out the polygons as much as I can to give us a nice kind of even density and distribution of the polygons as they flow across the surface of the mesh. Now, we can't ignore the topology of the sculpture as well, and you saw me bringing down an edge loop there and slowly adjusting it to match the curvature of the neck. That's an important part of this function as well. We got to be mindful of what's underneath and have the new geometry kind of match this other stuff. All right, now I'm just exploring how I'm going to connect the jaw into the rest of the head itself. And I got a little undisciplined. I like to kind of finish out the circle parts, the ring loops, before I go any further. I always, in my imagination, think this kind of looks like a little flower, that little pattern I'm pulling out there. But that's just me. I'm kind of weird like that. So I like to pull out all the edges of my circles pretty early on. I find that I get confused and lost in the entire system if I don't do that, and it's important that I kind of lay that foundation pretty early on. It also helps me decide how I'm going to connect these circular areas back into the grid of the model. I love working with the multi-cut tool. It just makes this whole process go a little bit faster. And now that I got this ring loop established for the jaw, I can start exploring and experimenting how I'm going to connect the eye back into the rest of the geometry that is going to create the head itself. And things are looking pretty good. I'm exploring here. I'm just trying to figure out what the best strategy is, and I think I'm just going to weld all the boundary points of that ring loop back into the center line of the edge and just extend out that eye ever so slightly so they can start connecting all the verts together. The multi-cut tool does a great job of allowing us to go in and very quickly just add a couple edge loops here and there so I can make connections. As I go through this process, I want you to be really mindful that I'm not looking to add new geometry. I'm looking to edit the existing geometry. I need to figure out how I'm going to send this geometry from the nose around the mesh itself. I don't want these edge loops to go into the eye, or I want to try to reduce that as much as I can. So I'm going to send it across the nose, which is going to make a real nice natural loop in that area. It keeps all the polygons for the nose in the nose area versus sending that geometry back towards the tail of the bear itself. And I love these little kind of bent loops. I don't know what their official name is. I'm sure if we did some research, we can figure out what their official name is. I call them, in my imagination, I call them kind of ring loops. Not ring loops, excuse me. I call them L loops, excuse me, because they make L's and J's in the mesh itself. And with those L loops established, I can start figuring out how to connect the cheek and the snout together. Now, if you look carefully, I'm starting to plan out how I want the geometry going around the cheek itself. And I'm sending the geometry back around the center of the x-axis. I'm making a gigantic L loop here instead of making a grid loop or a grid structure inside the mesh itself. And this just saves some geometry from going back to the rear of the animal. It keeps the cheek information in the cheek, which is pretty cool, and it saves us some hassle of trying to figure out how to terminate loops at the rear of the bear. We're gonna have enough of those challenges here in a minute, so I try to make it as easy as I can. I think I just discovered that I don't need a loop, so I just deleted it real fast, jumped to add a multi-cut, went into my component selection set, deleted that loop, and I came back in, and now things are gonna be fleshing out the way I want. More of those L loops again, sending that geometry instead of going back, I'm sending it across the center of the x-axis just to make a real efficient mesh. One of the cool things you can do with the multi-cut tool is extend out an entire edge loop, and that's what I just did there. And filling in the blanks here and exploring how I'm going to connect all these parts and pieces together. And I don't really necessarily have a plan. I'm just trying to see how I can use the existing structure to make a real nice series of topologies. And I just deleted an extra loop there. And now how am I going to do this corner? I don't know. I'm looking for some solutions. I added a loop, which is fine in this particular situation. And now I can close that hole. All right, time for some smoothing action. I love the smoothing tools in multi-cut. It's kind of the reason I come to Maya for all of my retopologizing works. The algorithm's great. It's really fantastic how it spaces it out, especially when you pair it with that soft selection engine. It's fantastic. I love being able to smooth the interior vertices separate from the exterior vertices or the border verts. It just really makes the management of all of this geometry a whole lot easier. Okay, now I'd like to establish the center line of my mesh as well. And things are looking pretty good here. Sometimes the smoothing gets a little aggressive, and it pushes the verts into an odd spot. As I pull up the ear here, I'm starting to figure out what I need to both recreate the shape, but also do it in a way that's efficient. I'm not trying to go for a zillion polygons. I'm just trying to get a basic understanding of the flow of these polygons across the surface. And once I got this done, I'll start working on the back and putting all those polygons in. I was very mindful to make sure that I had a center point on the top of the ear. If you think of an arc always needs to have an apex, that top point. So I got to make sure that's in there to make sure that I can have all quad polygons flowing across the mesh. All right, so how am I going to do this? I don't know. This is kind of the part of the process that I go through. I think what I'm going to do, let's do some counting. I got 10 edges going around the ear. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a 10-sided circle on the inside of the eardrum, and then I'll have the same number of sides on my circle as I do on the opening for this hole, and I can easily connect all of those verts together. So I just made it an 8-sided circle. There's the peak. So now I'm starting to find my landmarks for my geometry, and just extruding the edges and welding them all together. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, as they say. And it goes pretty well. It goes pretty fast. Now, some extra geometry with the loop slice tool. Again, just using multi-cut. Nothing too fancy here. The smoothing gets a little aggressive, so you got to be mindful because I lost some volume at the top of the ear. I undid that smoothing operation, and I'm going to go back in and tweak it here in a second by hand just to give me the result that I'm after. All right, with the head done, let's start figuring out all the other boundary loops for the rest of the model. So I'm working on the leg now. I like to throw down some simple dots using the multi-cut tool to make it easy for me to very quickly create the loops themselves. I find that extruding these edges can be a pain sometimes, but you know it's nice to have a series of tools that are real flexible and allow you to work the way that you want to work. Make sure you're counting as you go. That way you have a good understanding of how many edges you're using to build this surface in here. Now, I think if I remember correctly, both of those initial loops had 8 polygons going around the circumference of those loops, and that's a good place to begin. You know, we like to work within the power of 4 system, so 8, 12, 16, those are good loop numbers to begin our retopologizing with. Just kind of makes the math easy, and more importantly, it makes the math scalable. Alright, so as I work on the tail here, I'm just trying to figure out what I need to capture the shape and how I'm going to work with the polygons. Yeah, initially I think I started to go with a grid pattern in the back here, but that would send additional geometry back towards the head, specifically in that corner. Yeah, right in there. See how I just did the loop slice there? I saw where the loop was going, and I said, you know what, I'm going to send this loop across the center of the x-axis. Let's delete some geometry and make it work. And there it goes. A little smoothing action here to get it all lined up with the underlying sculpt. And things are starting to flush out pretty well for the little tail here. It's pretty low res, and I've done this by design. Alright, now, I have a big challenge here. I like to have a circular loop right around the elbow. And this is always the big challenge, because the geometry gets kind of tight in here. And there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of polygons flowing in and out of this area. So, as I go in here, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to connect this circle efficiently into the gigantic ring loop that's above it. as I pull out my little flower pattern. It's just something that I do. It's not anything industry wide. I think it just looks like a flower. I'm starting to conceptualize how I'm going to do this. So I've just made a grid on the outside of my circle. Sometimes it's easy to visualize how all of this works together if you have the loop down at the bottom already established as well. That way you have a good target as to where all this information is eventually going to need to flow. As I experiment around with the structure, I'm starting to see here that perhaps this isn't going to work the way that I wanted it to work. And this is part of the process of retopologizing. We got to go in, we got to lay down some polygons and see how it's all connecting. One of the things that I struggle with, especially with the legs, is getting these little twists in the polygons themselves. They're little helixes, these spirals that go up and down the leg. And I think I've discovered that the structure that I've created at the moment is going to produce one of those little helixes, one of those spirals. And that's not going to work. And at times, you can noodle around with the topology all that you want. But at times, the best thing to do is just to kind of delete what you have and start over, and use that experience of making a couple failures or having a couple failures into the generation of the next iteration of this. And I've decided that my 11-sided loop is not going to work. I want to have at least 12 or maybe even a 16. And I'm starting to see now that I'm generating a spiral. That bottom edge loop is going to twist and do a helix spiral up towards the top. And I'm not going to sit here and try to figure out how to do that, because I think I have a solution in mind. And that solution is just to grab everything, delete it, and rebuild this entire structure with a 12-sided loop going around the shoulder versus an 8-sided loop. Now, what this gains me and how I benefit is just by having some additional geometry in there. It makes it a little bit easier to connect an 8-sided circle that goes around the elbow into a 12-sided loop that establishes the shoulder. And you'll see this in action here in a minute. All right, back to the dots. Now, I struggled with the dots here. This is I'm holding down the shift key to try to automatically have the dots fill in with the circle, but it wasn't working because of its neighboring geometry. So I just said, you know what? I'm just going to do it by hand. I'll extrude it out real fast, clear the dots, and now we're into working it. Here's that little flower pattern again as I pull it out. I'm going up and down on the tops, and now I got to figure out what I'm going to do with the corners. Am I going to attach the corners, merge the corners as I'm doing here, or am I going to extrude out that final corner geometry? Now, my initial choice here was probably the wrong one, because what it didn't give me was an edge loop that goes between the top of the circle and the loop of the shoulder itself, right there. That's that extra row of polygons that I said, you know what? I think I want that. I want to have at least a 1 polygon buffer between the shoulder loop and the elbow loop. And now I found it. I found this solution. It's in front of me. It's been in front of me the entire time. Time to start putting it all together. It goes pretty fast. Once you find the solution to these little puzzles that we have to solve, it goes pretty quick. Try to find the patterns. And that's always the challenge for us when we're retopologizing, is that we have to work in this abstract environment to find a pattern that allows all these verts to be connected to each other. Went a little too high on that extrusion, so let me just pull it out real fast, using the tab middle mouse button to pull out that edge loop, and a little shift action to get it all smoothed out here in a second. I like to smooth as I go. It just kind of helps my brain understand what in the world is going on, because you can get lost in your geometry pretty fast. So smoothing it out is a good idea, especially the boundaries. My brain likes to see nice straight flat lines. It makes it a little bit easier for me to understand what's going on. All right, I'm pretty happy because now I have a 12-sided loop at the top that establishes the circle, or the shoulder, and I have the same number of polygons down here at the feet, and I'm ready to rock and roll. Now the feet can be a little bit tricky because our polygonal flow fundamentally changes in this area. It goes from being perfectly vertical up and down on the leg to being horizontal to establish the feet. And one of the things that I like to do when I'm establishing the feet is to create a nice little boundary loop down here at the bottom that establishes the overall kind of soul of the foot, if you will. By having a loop down here, we're able to control the shape. We're able to define how that shape is going to be influenced and what that shape fundamentally looks like inside the structure of the model itself. So I like to do this. It just takes a second. sets a good foundation. I didn't have enough verts there, so a couple little loop slices to add some geometry in. And yeah, now I'm getting the structure that I need. Voila, wonderful. Connecting this to the back, to the heel, is a good idea. It allows us to hide some wonkiness in the heel. You're going to find the foot is a great place to hide some sins, as they say, some errors. You're going to have some, or at times you can have some really odd geometry, and that's okay, because down here in the foot, no one's really going to be looking at the foot that much. Believe it or not, it's going to be kind of hidden. And oh, I think I discovered I messed up. I connected the foot to the wrong, or that loop to the wrong area. There we go. Haha, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing the same thing that I did on the bottom of the foot with the top. A nice little boundary along the top to define the shape with some polygons. And once again, it must have been late when I was doing this because I made the same mistake twice. I connected the loop to the wrong polygon. I wanted it to connect to the fourth one, not the third one. And now we're getting the grid that I want to create that structure. Let's smooth it out a little bit here and start connecting the top of the foot to the bottom of the foot with just a simple application of the shift key while using the multi-cut tool. Now I got a little bit of an issue here and this is kind of what you see in the feet sometimes, is that the termination of these points can get a little weird. And I think I just figured out the solution. Adding a couple extra edge loops into the foot itself gives me the polygons flowing in the right direction to solve the problem and to get everything working. Yeah, I got a kind of a weird one on the inside of the foot, but that's okay. No one's going to be looking at the inside of the foot. There's going to be fur. There's going to be a texture. Hey, no one is going to see it, so I'm really not going to worry about it. Some extra geometry going around the toes is going to help kind of flush out the shape. It gives me some additional information that will make a nice sculptural reproduction of the model itself. So pretty pleased with that leg, and that's working out well. All right. Now, let's start figuring out how we can fix the ear, because I mentioned this earlier that I didn't have enough geometry in the ear, so I've just selected that edge that runs along the peak of the ear, just did a simple bevel to add in some additional geometry, smoothing it out to spread it out, which gives me a nice flat surface at the top. The smoothing algorithm kind of did me no justice in that moment, and it kind of collapsed the shape, so I had to go in by hand and do it. However, this bevel operation left me with an n-gon, so I need to start slicing up some polygons with the multi-cut tool to change the direction and to add some geometry in here to flow in the right direction. I still got an n-gon, and I need to figure out how to resolve that n-gon. Let's see, is it going to go that way? No, it's not going to work. How about... Oh, wait, I got it. It goes that way, and then I delete that edge, and voila! I have made my little L loop going from the back there across the nose of the bear. So sometimes you just got to play with it. You got to figure out the flow. It's okay to make mistakes. That's a great thing about working in our industry, is that we can fail often and a lot. And just hit the undo key or rip out some geometry and start again. Much like I did at the beginning on the face, it's now time to start creating the center line for the bear itself. And if I get this in pretty early on, it helps give me a nice solid guide as to how all of this is going to connect. For the arm, we got to make some decisions here. The first 4 or 6 polygons on the top of the shoulder are going to be extruded up, and then the rest are going to be extruded to the left and the right. Here's a great little trick. Don't connect the polygons next to the neck itself. That way you can use the middle mouse button with the tab key and pull out entire big chunks of the body very, very quickly. It makes it go a whole lot faster. And then I'm pretty happy with this, so let me just, triangle. I wasn't supposed to weld. I was supposed to fill in. There he goes. Smooth it out, and we're on our way. Let's kind of fill in the field now with some polygons. It goes pretty fast. The body is actually pretty easy, especially if we're being super mindful of the geometry that's existing in the mesh itself. Let's figure out the flow of the back leg. The back leg is a little bit of a problem, and when I was making this retopology, I made a mistake. I didn't add 12 loops or 12 polygons to the boundary loop for the back leg. That was a mistake that I made that I should have gone in and fixed, but since my plan was to not do the entire back leg, just the body, the front leg, and the face, it was fine for the purposes of this illustration. Now, I made a little bit of a mistake here. I got a little too excited about attaching the leg, and I forgot about all the polygons that were flowing across the belly. Now, I'm taking them under the leg here. There you go. See how they all flow under? Which is cool. A lot of geometry can be hidden under the leg. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to terminate these loops before we go any further. the termination of these loops is something that we need to consider. When we're bringing our geometry from one area of our mesh into another, we got to figure out, okay, where is it going to flow naturally? How is this geometry going to conclude its loop? And where in the system, in the model, is it going to conclude? That's always a question that I'm asking myself as I go through this. You're going to see me do it on the bottom and on the top. Yeah, all right, let's figure out the top here real fast. And I know that I don't want this to go down into the tail, so it's time for more of those wonderful, wonderful little L loops that I like. It's going to loop back towards the center of the x-axis. Now, notice that I'm leaving a gap in between one of the rows. This works out really well because then it gives me a nice kind of buffer between these two L loops, and it just really resolves a lot of wonkiness that sometimes the smoothing engine can produce when working with these L and J loops as they swoop across the mesh itself. There we go. A couple little quick additions and deletions to some unneeded edges inside the mesh. Some smoothing action to make it all make sense in my brain, and now we got to figure out how we're going to get all of these edge loops terminating in the back. So they're going to be L loops. And again, I'm doing every other one here. There we go. A couple more edges that are needed to connect all these parts and pieces together. And then voila, just a simple little filling in with the shift key and the multi-cut. The smoothing is getting a little extreme back there, but that's okay. We can manage that. Now we have 3 edges on the right and 2 edges on the left. So I have to make a decision here, and I counted the edges on the leg. We had 9, or we had 8, now we have 9, and I think that's going to work just fine for what I'm doing. And there it is. It's all connected together.